Hello, I'm Dave Neale, Global Director of Animal Sentience and Welfare Education for Animals Asia. And this talk is all about bears and looking particularly at some of their social and their emotional and their cognitive aspects and the complexity of their individual lives. So, firstly, the talk is going to talk about all bear species. So, let's just take a look at the range of bear species. At Animals Asia, we work a lot with Asiatic black bears and sun bears, but we're also going to be discussing aspects of lives of the brown bears and polar bears and the panda bear, giant pandas, as well as the American black bear. And the spectacled and the sloth bears make up those 8 bear species globally. And as I mentioned, this is really going to be looking at some of those aspects that maybe we don't always talk about with bears. And so hopefully get a sense of who bears are as individuals, their social, their emotional, and their cognitive complexities. So, firstly, looking at their social complexity, we often talk about bears as being solitary individuals, and yet they live in environments where they coexist with other individuals. So they must recognize those other individuals. And in many cases, they actually express quite a high level of sociability. So some form of interactions between individuals, particularly individuals such as mothers and their former offspring, so when they become adults, or the siblings themselves, which actually have a relationship with each other. Some research documenting the American black bears were showing that they maintain an awareness of other bears in their overlapping home ranges and may even maintain some particularly intricate social relationships, again, particularly between these family individuals within the same family. In one particular case, there was a mother bear who had one cub, and her daughter from a previous litter had 3 cubs. And it was seen that these two adults would come together and the cubs would interact with each other, even to the point that at some point the mother actually began caring for one of her daughter's offsprings. So she had one cub and the daughter had 3, and they almost sort of shared the responsibility so that they were looking after 2 cubs each. They may even form some form of alliances between individuals. This has been noticed with females that maybe have a low social ranking and are likely to be chased away from areas of food where there are good food resources by other females. These females may form an alliance, associate very closely with a male bear in that home range within that territory so that they get protection to be able to access these good quality food areas because the females are less likely to approach them when the male is present. And of course, that social relationship is particularly important between the mother and the infant, and mothers make excellent mums, of course, bears. Mother bears, they're affectionate towards their youngsters, protective, they're attentive, and they help to raise their cubs. You can see here with this example of the polar bears, and there's some really nice footage and images showing polar bears, which will encourage their youngsters to get onto their backs and they will carry their cubs when they're trying to navigate through areas where there's a lot of ice and a lot of icy water. So if they're out hunting for seals, their cubs can't always navigate these same environments because the cubs don't have their full waterproof protection. So going into those cold waters could cause them, significant harm. And so the mothers might encourage them to jump on their backs and then be able to carry them from one place to another. It's a very intricate relationship between the two. So the mums are essentially teaching their cubs all the things that they need to know about their environments. They're teaching them where to hunt for food, where to forage for food, and then protecting them from danger. And to be able to do this effectively, they need to communicate with each other and they need to be able to understand each other, to be able to understand how each other is feeling and what they're trying to say to each other. So they've got this very intricate relationship going on. And there's just a nice video here which kind of demonstrates the life of a mum bear. So these are brown bears in Canada, and you can see here, mum's obviously had a probably an incredibly busy time suckling these bears, raising these bears, foraging for self, trying to get a little bit of rest. And here you can see just one of those cubs. You can see from watching this mum is this bear's complete world. She relies upon her. She's climbing all over her. She's playing on her. Eventually, she kind of disturbs her enough to start to get her up and to actually do something that she wanted to do, maybe. But again, just shows that intricate relationship between mum and the infant in a really, really nice and acute way. So communication is particularly important for bears, and social communication is particularly important between individuals, shown previously there with the mother and the youngsters, but it's also important between the adults. And bears are really good communicators in many different ways, both visually through body language, vocally through the way that they will the signals that they give to each other, and also chemically. And through all this and through their scent marking, and they will do all this to express both their emotions to each other and also their intentions, what they're about to do, telling other bears to either watch out or trying to encourage the bears to come closer. It's been documented that adult polar bears that have a social connection will wag their heads from side to side to indicate that they intend to interact playfully rather than aggressively. Adult polar bears not often seen together outside of for breeding. These are likely to be either siblings, so maybe two brothers or a brother and sister from the same litter, going to adults, or maybe the mother with their daughter coming together and as adults, and then communicating with each other to say, look, I'm coming here towards you. I want to interact. I want to interact playfully. And if they're both doing these head waggles, then it's likely that they're sending those signals to each other that this is a playful interaction. It's also been documented some bears have their own facial expressions to communicate a desire to play with each other. So, and again, bears understanding the facial expression, what it means in another bear, and then being able to engage in something positive socially. We rescue some bears at our rescue centre in Vietnam. This is a video showing a couple of... see those constant facial expressions between those bears throughout that interaction. As well as these visual signals, bears are always giving off or will give off these vocal signals to each other as well. So these growls or these huffs and roars, telling another bear how they're feeling, what their intentions are, what they're doing, and obviously used, like many animals, really just to try to prevent any kind of physical interaction between individuals in many cases. So if a bear is approaching a bear in its personal environment, vocal signals will be the very first thing that they go to try to say to another bear to either go away or to maybe to come closer. But whatever, hopefully the signal will be well received and another bear will react upon that to avoid any potential conflict. Vocal communication particularly important, again, with the mother and the infant, and here within polar bears have been studied quite a lot. Polar bear cubs have these wide range of vocalizations to convey what their emotions are and their needs to their mothers. So we've got a couple of examples here. The first one is a contented bear. So this is a bear which is likely to be feeding or is just fed, and it's just going off these very contented vocalizations. Second one here is a much more distressed bear, so a non-contented bear. The bear cub is basically not getting its own way. Subtle difference between the two. Again, a range of communication signals bears give another bear understands how they're feeling. And bears communicate through scent. They will urinate, they defecate, they rub themselves against trees. All of this leaves the scent, their hormones, in a particular environment for another bear to come and to find, to know who that bear is as an individual, and to know that they're in that environment, and maybe to either stay away from them, or to attract another bear towards them, particularly in the mating season. Brown bears are actually known to have particularly smelly feet, so lots of scent glands within their feet. And when they're walking, they're likely to sort of twist their feet into the ground, and another bear will then come along and will use that scent trail to be able to pick up information about that particular bear and that particular individual within their environment, to know they're in there. And they're also likely then to put their own feet into there, twist their own feet into the ground as well, to kind of reply, to give more information for the bear when it comes back to that point. And that sense of smell is particularly important for bears. A really important sense for them to be able to use, to be able to get information from their environment about other individuals and other things within their environment. And polar bears use that particularly as part of their strategy to find food. And polar bears are hunting over really vast ranges of sea ice, and they need to be able to smell seals, and whereabouts their location of those seals are. And it's estimated they can possibly smell seals from over 9 kilometers away, and then can obviously start moving towards that direction so they can hunt. As well as being incredibly good at communicating, they also are emotionally complex individuals. And bears experience a wide range of emotions, from positive emotions to negative emotions. It's been documented through looking at stress hormones, the presence of stress hormones in bears' feces and urine, as well as in hair samples, that bears which are being held in very poor captive conditions, such as the bear here on the right-hand side, are experiencing stress. They express a lot of stress hormones when they're in these conditions. But also wild bears or free-ranging bears also experiencing increasing amounts of stress now due to human disturbance. So living in environments where maybe their habitat has been impacted, they've lost the amount of food which is available within their habitat. Maybe roads are being built through former areas where they travelled, so they're having to interact with people and having to go cross busy roads. By looking at by monitoring the stress hormones in these bears, it's shown that this is causing, or we are causing, a significant amount of stress for free ranging as well as bears within captivity. And it's possible to show that bears experience these different types of emotions, and look towards whether bears are either in an optimistic or in a positive mood, or in a pessimistic or a negative mood. And this can be done through various behavioral experiments. And this is something, if we think about it from ourselves, it's like the sort of glass half full, glass half empty scenario. So if we're in a good mood and we're in a positive situation, we're feeling good about ourselves, and we're presented with a glass which is got it's half full of water, we're likely to say the glass is half full. If we're in a bad mood, a pessimistic mood, and we see that same glass of water, we're likely to describe it as being half empty. We can show that bears experience this as well, and through this research, it's been shown that bears which have greater foraging opportunities, so much more complex environments, often have optimistic decision making, so they are optimists more so than bears which have fewer opportunities. And this has been shown by training bears to react to touch screens with different color backgrounds. So in this case, the bears were shown a touch screen with a white color background. And eventually, after a number of trials and errors, they realized that if they touched the white screen on the left-hand side, they received a food reward, in this case, 3 large food items, something that they really liked. They were then shown a screen with a black background, and eventually, after a number of trials, they learned that if they touched the screen on the right-hand side, this time, not the left-hand side, then they would receive one food reward. So nothing quite like they would with the white background. So the white background is much more positive for them. They're then given an ambiguous color. So in this case, a gray. So somewhere between the black and the white. And this is where we can test their moods in different environments. So bears which were in these environments which had lots of foraging opportunities, lots of food available, lots of things for them to do, are much more likely to approach this grey, ambiguous colour, which they haven't been trained on, and touch it on the left-hand side because they associate it more with they do with the white colour, which was very positive, or the better of the two outcomes. Bears which have no opportunities, the foraging opportunities, very sort of sterile environments, are much more likely to be more pessimistic when they approach the grey colour and to touch the right-hand side, which gets less of a food reward. So again, being able to show that bears experience these different moods of optimism and pessimism. And we know, of course, anybody who's watched bears, and particularly young bears, we know that they experience joy and they can experience fun. In this case, these are two young polar bears which are playing. Playing obviously is very fun for them, a lot of fun for the bears, but also helps them develop socially, develops them to learn skills, build up their muscles, etc. But bears also like to play on their own as well. And this video shows a bear at a zoo a panda bear at a zoo in the US, in Washington, just sliding around in the snow and doing something that we can all recognize is something which is fun to do. Bowling, and in a moment you'll see him rolling. We go rolling past the screen, doing something that we can all recognise. We've either done it ourselves or we see young children doing this, rolling around in the snow, having fun. Panda bears, just like all bears, have this need to be in an environment where they can experience these positive feelings and emotions. And play is a particularly interesting thing to look at, particularly social play between two individuals, because bears, like any individual which successfully engages in social play, show a moral behavior to this play. So play has very distinct, what we call unwritten rules. We know this. For play to continue, one individual has to temper their behavior. One individual is likely to be stronger than the other. If you play with all your force, and you're likely to, that play will instantly stop because you will harm the other individual. So fair play is what you instantly adopt. And bears do this, and this demonstrates that animals, including these bears, understand or have an understanding of these moral values. And you can see that from this nice interaction between a mother and her cub, the cub coming over to play much smaller than she is, and the two being able to do that because the mother is tempering her strength to ensure that she's being fair to her youngster. And I show this as an example of moral behaviour, but also just because it's lovely to watch, right? It's really lovely to see a mother playing with her young cub. So bears are complex socially, complex communication, emotionally complex. They're also cognitively complex as well. They have incredible memories. They live in these very complex environments. Their food availability in those environments is likely to vary to different types of foods being available in different locations. They need to be able to memorize that. They need to be able to create a mental map of their home range and to be able to go to those areas at specific times of the year, specific times of the season, to know they can access that particular food type. So they memorize all of this information, learn it, and then recall it, and then use that information in the future. They share their living environment with many other individuals. We talked about this as well in terms of their social interactions, sometimes good, sometimes bad. They need to be able to remember, recognize those individuals when they see them, remember the previous interactions they've had with those individuals and whether they're positive or negative, so that will then can influence what they now do, to whether they need to move away from that individual, whether they know that individual is much more tolerant of them being in the same environment. So again, using this ability, this memory ability, all of the time to be able to understand their environment and all of those individuals in their environment. Bears are known to be able to solve problems. In some cases, it's been reported they've even been able to outsmart people which are trying to trap them. And in these cases, it's been reported that they've come towards an area where somebody has unfortunately set a trap for them, and they've rolled rocks onto the trap to activate the trap. So the trap is set off, the bear doesn't get caught, and then they can go in and they can try to remove the bait which is near the trap, which is what they've been placed there to try to bring them in. And in this behavioral experiment, again with captive bears demonstrated ability to use tools. So in this case, the bear was presented with a food item which was strung up out of reach. It was in an environment then where there was this tree stump, and the bear had to manipulate the tree stump, put it into the situation, move it so it was in a situation where they could use it to stand on to retrieve the food item. And in this case, these bears successfully did that. So being able to work out the problem, work out the solution, and then carry out that using this tool. And there's anecdotal evidence of tool use in the wild. Bears been seen using these are rocks which are covered with barnacles. So they're really knobbly rocks and they're using that to scratch the side of their faces, possibly to remove things like bits of fish, scales and the bones which have got stuck in the fur, or removing fur when they're molting. So again, using a tool in their environment to be able to carry out this behavior. Bears have demonstrated this ability for transfer learning. So this is being able to recognize things that they know exist in real life by looking at a photograph of the same thing. So in this case, bears were given lots of different food items, some that they really liked and some that they didn't particularly like. And then they were shown in their real life, and then they were shown these food items in photographs and presented with them. And the researchers documented which food items they approached, and they would invariably approach the photograph of the food item that they really liked. Again, being able to show that they can transfer that information that they have about a real life situation into a two-dimensional image on a photograph. And bears also have numerical abilities as well. So being able to count, like many animals have. Captive American black bears, again within a research environment, have shown that they can distinguish the number of dots on an image. So in this case, bears were shown lots of different images with dots on. And if they went to the image with a larger number of dots on, then they were given a reward. So over a period of time, they learned that going to an image with a large dots on get them a reward. But research needed to show, well, was this them actually counting the number of dots, or was it just that those dots occupied a greater surface area, and so therefore that was why they were going to them? So they were then presented with a different array of dots. In this case, they were presented with these two arrays. The one on the left has 6 dots, the one on the right has 8 dots. The one on the left occupies a greater surface area than the one on the right. But the bears invariably went to the one on the right, which is showing that they're not using surface area, they are actually using the number of dots to count So having some kind of mechanism to show that there are more on the right than the left, and go into that because they know that's when they will get the greater food rewards. There was all kinds of different arrays which were shown to these bears, and in this case, they're also shown arrays which had red dots on. They hadn't been trained to use to acknowledge red dots, because they're really just to sort of create a little bit of complexity to the environment. And again, they would always choose the array here on the right, which has the more black dots than the array on the left with the least number of dots. Bears are social learners. So, as we saw earlier, particularly important relationship between mother and their cubs. I mean, bear cubs will learn from their mothers all the time. They're learning how to find food, how to stay safe with their environment, how to react socially with that environment when they come across other bears. This is the cultural transmission of essential information from one individual, from the mother, passed down to the generations. Bears can be perceptive. American black bears are known to perceive the risks of crossing roads. So, monitoring the heart rate of bears, has been shown that black bears which are coming up towards busy roads, not when they're on busy roads, but when they're approaching areas where there are busy roads, their heart rate is increasing. So they are perceiving threats which are in their environment, and this hopefully is part of their survival skills, because they're much more aware of what's happening in their environment, and they need to be more aware, particularly when they're coming up to roads, and which are much more busier than other roads, to ensure their own safety. So, a bit of a quick run through, but hopefully you can see from that bears are particularly both socially, emotionally, and cognitively complex individuals, and have all of these social, emotional, cognitive aspects to their lives, which are particularly important to them as individuals to be able to operate within their own environment. Bears are also ecosystem engineers, so they actually are beneficial to have within the environment. So many bears are browsers, so they're eating fruits, and the seeds within those fruits pass through their body, and they'll be defecated out in their feces, and this helps plant diversity to spread. So it helps those plants to replant those seeds. Those plants can grow in different areas, so it helps with the floral diversity of their ecosystems. They also influence the lives of other species in their environment. So in this case, the black bear is an influencing factor on the grey wolves in North America. So grey wolves and coyotes often compete for very similar food sources and similar space. So grey foxes have learned that if they associate in areas where there are black bears, then coyotes are less likely to outcompete them. And this is because the black bear is much more likely to chase away a coyote than it is a grey fox. So the grey fox kind of spends its time being able to access areas where there are food and space, by associating closely with the American black bear. This changes then in the winter, when the black bears go into hibernation, and the grey foxes no longer have this protection, and they're likely to get outcompeted by the coyotes. And also, Asiatic black bears have an indirect influence on the lives of animals which live on the forest floor. In this case, the wild boar, but also deer within the forests. And these animals, these forest-dwelling animals, ground-dwelling animals, will in some cases follow Asiatic black bears who are up in the trees, because the bears, as they're in the trees and they're eating, they're pulling off acorns, and they're pulling out pine nuts, and some of these are dropping to the ground, and this is producing a windfall for these other animals. And it's even known now that the wild boar will listen and hear the acoustic communication signals, the sounds, the vocal sounds of Asiatic black bears, and then will follow them, will find them, and then follow them in that environment so that they can receive these rewards. Unfortunately, as we mentioned earlier, many thousands of bears suffer from poor welfare. Many are held in really poor captive conditions, either in zoos or commercially on farms where they have their bile extracted. And this is causing a significant amount of stress and suffering to an incredibly a socially, emotionally, and cognitively complex species, individuals. Bears are forced often through fear or stress and punishment to perform tricks in circuses in far too many places around the world. Again, something which is causing very poor welfare and large amounts of suffering for our entertainment. And many bears are also threatened. So 6 of the 8 bear species, including the polar bear here, are all included on the IUCN Red List as either threatened or vulnerable. Polar bears particularly vulnerable to things due to global warming. Asiatic black bears have been hunted for many centuries for their skin, for their paws, for their gallbladder, all again used in Oriental medicine. They've lost huge amounts of their habitat destruction, so their numbers have declined rapidly. And similar for the sun bear as well. So sun bear habitat has been decimated in many of its former ranges. Forest habitat has been destroyed by logging and conversion of areas for agriculture. It's agriculture often then being used to grow food for us to eat, or to feed to other animals, to grow them for us to eat. So again, we have a major influence on the lives of all bear species around the world. So thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I hope that through this presentation you take something positive away from it about the social, emotional, and cognitive complexity of bears as a group of species, and take away the fact that we have a responsibility to those bears, to those individuals, whatever species they are, whatever situation they're in. So we have a responsibility to ensure that bears which are in captivity are experiencing good lives, have these possibilities of experiencing positive emotions by providing them with good environment and with all of the factors that they need to experience good welfare, but also that we have a responsibility towards all those wild bears as well, and to protecting the habitat for those wild bears so that they can live on into the future, and also they can experience positive situations in their wild state. Thank you very much.